Hi guys, this is a section taken from this week's Zonal Marking podcast, which was on AC Milan. You can listen to the rest of the show for free wherever you get your podcasts. You can also currently get access to The Athletic's unrivaled football writing for just £1 or $1 a month. Just go to theathletic.com/zonal marking, all one word, and you'll be able to read James Horncastle's incredible behind-the-scenes piece on Milan, including interviews with Paolo Maldini, Stefano Pioli, Ivan Gazidis, and many more. Now in the present, 2020, as we are, 10 years since Milan's last Scudetto. They've been absent from the Champions League since 2014. So the next section of the pod, I'm afraid, has to be on something of a downfall. And James, you touched on this in your piece. There's a few factors at play that I'd like to work through. One of them, which you can't really get away with, is financial challenges faced by Milan and, well, a lot of sides in Italian football and Serie A compared to other nations such as England, of course, and the Premier League. Exactly what were or have been the financial challenges for Milan that have contributed to this barren spell?
Well, I think you have to consider them in the context of Italian football as a whole. Really, since 2006, when Italy won the World Cup, their kind of high watermark, and you have to say probably the beginning of the end for a golden generation of players, which Milan in particular were able to draw on for a little bit longer. Even looking back at their last title-winning team, 2010-11 under Max Allegri, that was still able to call on the likes of Alessandro Nesta, the likes of Pippo Inzaghi, Gattuso, Pirlo. Players had really formed part of that Lippi's World Cup winning side. But I think 2006 is a turning point for a lot of reasons. If you look at the Deloitte Money League from that time, the gap between Milan and the richest clubs in terms of their revenue was only around 50 million. And I think 2006 is significant because that's when, for example, the Bundesliga clubs, they completely overhaul their stadia to modern football purpose-built grounds, which they can make quite a lot of money from. Premier League in that time was about to go to the next level in terms of the amount of TV money that they could gather around the world, because this is one of the kind of quite interesting things, I suppose, about that period is Milan were the Italian side that reached 3 finals between 03, 05 and 07. But that's kind of a period that we associate, I would say, with Premier League teams doing really well as well in that competition. It sort of becomes a bit of a Premier League, La Liga decade, if you like. And on the back of that success, the Premier League is able to go out and sell TV rights on very favourable terms. And then I suppose you also have at the second half of that decade the emergence of players like Ronaldo, the emergence of players like Lionel Messi, who go to Spain and supplement this incredible Spanish generation, which become these kind of iconic clubs, I suppose, and in a way that Barcelona have always been, but Barcelona became so much more significant and so much more relevant, I think, in that time under Pep Guardiola, in the way that I suppose Milan was at the beginning of the 90s as a trailblazing, tactically innovative side that everyone around the world wanted to watch. But I mean, within Serie A, you have the scandal of Calciopoli. You have the fact that they haven't invested in infrastructure. That is going back to what I was saying about Stadia, but it's also about their youth academies in terms of bringing players through. They spent almost everything they earned on retaining those absolute global superstars that we all kind of fell in love with in the late 90s and early 2000s, without kind of basically thinking, we should maybe look at how we can develop the next generation. And then you have these family owners, Silvio Berlusconi at Milan, who becomes mired in scandal. Basically, Milan was not run as a business. It was an indulgence. So they weren't making much money, certainly in terms of what they were paying their superstars. And their family basically said, look, we've got to kind of call it a day with this. They couldn't compete with sovereign wealth funds coming into the European game. And you might say that in hindsight, the teams that have replaced Milan and Inter in the Champions League are Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain, because of that they have gone about the spending that those two clubs used to do. So I think it's kind of a confluence of all those things that made it very difficult for Milan to stay competitive. They could have done with better management, more far-sighted management. But instead, I think this is one of those cautionary tales of, if you let it slip, it can very quickly get away from you. And I think Italian clubs just aren't protected in the way that Premier League clubs are, by being in a league which, just by dint of geography, the bottom club in the Premier League will make as much, if not close to, what a Juventus will make in TV money. It's absolutely ludicrous.
Michael, let's go through some of the mistakes made, perhaps from a footballing perspective and a football strategy perspective, because with those financial challenges that Serie A has faced, sort of accepted, you still look at Italian football and their performances within just Italian football, and aside from Juventus, even clubs like Napoli and Atalanta and Roma and Lazio and of course Inter have performed a lot better than AC Milan over the last 5 or 6 years. So when you look at how it's gone for them on the pitch over the last 5 or 6 years, let's say, what's been missing? What have they done wrong? What do you put it down to?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, personally, I think really their problems over the last decade stem from the fact that they had an ageing side for so long, leading up to about 2011 was their last title. And they ended up losing a great generation of players almost all at once. The likes of Nesta in particular, I think of as a particularly bad loss, but also Pirlo and Gattuso and Inzaghi. And there were lots of other players. And I think one issue is I don't think their squad has ever really recovered from that. The other issue is they've appointed they've made some bad appointments. I think they've often tried to, they clearly want a kind of Milan philosophy. And you look at the appointments, they've appointed a lot of former players. I mean, in the last decade alone, there's been Leonardo, Seedorf, Inzaghi, Brocchi and Gattuso, some of them only on a temporary basis. But some of those, I mean, in hindsight, Leonardo seemed like he didn't even really particularly want to become a manager. I thought that was a particularly strange one. Then he ended up at Inter as well, which was even stranger. I mean, I think when you look at the managers who have had success, with Ancelotti in the mid-2000s, and Allegri, who I think did quite a very good job with a squad that was on its last legs. They had managerial experience before. Ancelotti had been at Parma and Juventus. Allegri had done a promising job with Cagliari, although I think it was, actually a very good appointment when he came in. And I guess they've now swung more towards going for a manager who isn't just promoted from the Primavera, someone who has performed well elsewhere, and broadly look to be going in the right direction now.
Let's take a look at the current squad then, because as you mentioned there, the rebuilding process probably could and should have started quite a while ago, and perhaps they haven't made the right moves in a recruitment sense to ever end up with a squad ready to challenge again in Serie A and in European competition. Michael, when you take a look at Milan's current squad, what stands out for you? I mean, we looked at squad depth last week, so I've got that very much in the forefront of my mind. And, it's a young squad in the most part, but with some very key and notable bringers of experience, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, like you say, I mean, from last week, I'm kind of just accustomed to looking at players' age as much as their ability after the way we spoke about Premier League squads. And certainly the signings from this summer with Rebic and Krunic and Rafael Leao and Leo Duarte, all 25 or under. They certainly look to be building for the long term. They also have, some players who are already there who are coming into their peak. I mean, Benacer, Theo Hernandez, who's been excellent at left back, and perhaps most obviously Donnarumma in goal, who seems to have been there forever and yet is still 22, could be about 10 years away from his peak. Who knows? I think the issue is, I mean, looking at their first game, the 2-0 victory over Bologna, the 2 goals came from Ibrahimovic, who is 39 this week and is still an absolutely extraordinary player. And his goal-scoring record has remained pretty consistent throughout his 30s. But I do think the problem with Ibrahimovic is not just that, he's getting on and you don't necessarily want to be depending on him. But when you have Ibrahimovic in your team, and everyone over the years has found this from Inter to Barcelona to Milan in his first spell, everything becomes based around him because he's so good, he's so dominant. I think he wants to be involved in build-up play, maybe less so than before. And also because he's so good in the air, I think teams tend to end up almost just flinging the ball into the box a little bit too quickly. And that's how Milan's first goal came on Saturday. across from Hernandez and a classic header from Ibrahimovic. It's working for them this season, but at some point, of course, they will have to get in another centre-forward, a younger centre-forward, who probably won't have all of Ibrahimovic's qualities. And I think that transition, the post-Ibrahimovic shift is often very difficult for clubs.
Yeah, it's interesting because, they started, if you like, this revolution in their recruitment program already last summer. Yeah, Michael alluded to some of the guys that they brought in. And, they went very young. In last summer's transfer window. I think Rebic was the oldest player that they signed, and he was 25 at the time. And I don't think that reflected there being a kind of anti-experience faction on the transfer committee that they have there, because ultimately they went into the market and corrected that in January when they signed Zlatan and Simon Kjaer. And I think what's been really fascinating to follow over the last 6 months is how the young players have kind of grown around Zlatan. And I spoke to Benacer maybe at the end of last season, and he said that Zlatan has just taken the pressure off all of us because he just dominates, not just games, but he grabs people's attention, and that just allows us to focus on what we're doing, have a little bit more time, space on the ball as well. And Maldini reiterates this in the piece, is that they have really benefited from Zlatan's competitiveness in training, competitiveness in all aspects of his kind of professional life. It's kind of, again, focused their minds. It ensures that they're all there listening, paying attention. And that intangible aspect has been kind of as important as the goals. But I think what they want to see over the next season really is Rebic, for example. He can play centre forward if needed to. And also Rafael Leao, who was, I think, their most expensive signing last summer from Lille. And towards the end of the last campaign, he started to make a more consistent impact from the bench. But I think they want to see him start delivering on the potential he showed for kind of Portugal's under-21s, either from out wide and then I think evolve into a centre forward. So I think that's the thinking at Milan going into this season.